The transfer portal is open. How many Boston College players are in it? And what are our thoughts on that? We'll get all into that.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black. I'm the editor of Eagle Insider. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get yourself started. Now, as you can see and down below, we're talking the transfer portal on Monday morning. The transfer portal officially opened. Now, you may have heard names entered. Thomas Castellanos has been in it for about a month. Other players have started to get their names in there. They didn't officially get their name in until today. We'll talk about that. We're going to look at Donovan Ezeiruaku. Should he be in the conversation for national awards? And finally, Mitch is on to talk to us about the Nebraska Cornhuskers, who are losing players left and right to the transfer portal. We'll talk about how that's going to impact BC's game against them in the Pinstripe Bowl. But as I said, to kick this off, Mitchell Wolf. Mitch is back from his vacation. Mitch, how you doing?
I go across the ocean, go to mainland Europe. I go to this little town that's between Munich and Salzburg. It's an island on a lake. And I'm taking a morning and I'm looking out at the lake. I'm watching the wind. I'm hearing the waves. And even across the waves, I hear, "Why is Boston College in the shotgun on 4th and 1?" Just can't escape it, no matter how far away I go.
That's the question everyone has, right?
Yes.
And it never ends. And yeah. Well, let's get into this. Let's talk first of all about the transfer portal. Now BC is up to, I believe, 8 players, that are in the portal now. And as I mentioned to kick this off, there's players you already knew about. Thomas Castellanos obviously has been in for a while. He's officially in as the portal itself, like the gates of Mordor, opened up, and folks can enter in. Buyer beware for some. They may end up, as Brian Doan has said, some players don't even know it, but they have played their last down of football. But for others, they're trying to find a new home. And for BC, we knew about all these players entering, other than 2 that entered on Monday morning. The biggest one, literally and figuratively, is Jerand Bradley. And then Montrell Wade, a redshirt freshman that we never really saw play. We're not going to talk about Montrell Wade all that much because we really never got to see him play. But we're going to talk about Jerand Bradley because this was an entry that both Mitch and I saw coming. I mean, it seemed like this was the case. But this was a wide receiver that transferred in from Texas Tech. We watched him play this summer. We watched him play during camp. He got a lot of publicity from, his size and the way he played. But by the time he left, he had been overshadowed by Reed Harris, and for good reason, because Reed Harris looked really good by the end of the season. Mitch, what are your thoughts on Jerand Bradley and his 1-year tenure at Boston College?
Yeah, I think this is a case of just kind of everything that could go wrong for him did go wrong, aside from a catastrophic season-ending injury or something. He gets here, they're installing this new offense. Well, first of all, he commits here to Jeff Hafley. Jeff Hafley leaves. Bill O'Brien comes in. He elects to stay, which very respectable decision to do. Like, he could have entered the portal again, tried to find somewhere else in the spring, but he decided to stay on. Figured he wanted a more, pro-style normal offense to work in, and that makes sense for a guy like him.
And he knows Darryl Wyatt, who stayed on.
That too, and then eventually we also know that he was a high school teammate of Grayson James, so they have some chemistry going back to those days. In the summer, there's some good reports of him making plays. Then into the fall, like the fall camp, the later summer, I think he gets some kind of lingering injury and he's not practicing as much, which at that time, that's when you want to be building up the chemistry with the quarterbacks, regardless of who they are. So that causes him to fall down the depth chart a bit, or at least in terms of distribution of targets, because he's playing, he starts the FSU game. I don't think he gets a single target. He had a lot of those cardio games where he's just running around doing nothing for a bunch of snaps, which, not necessarily his fault, for the whole time. But I think that injury lingered throughout the season. And then midway through the season, there's the quarterback change, obviously. And I think part of the issue with that is, well, I guess before this issue is that Thomas Castellanos, even going back to last year, I was like, I don't think this guy really loves to throw like deep down the field contested catch balls unless the receiver is really, really wide open, or it's a guy he has like, just tons of trust with. And we saw that become kind of an issue. I think honestly the receiver he was best at that with was Jaden Skeet, who was pretty decently productive before his injury. That happens. Quarterback change happens. Bradley's still not really playing. This in the last month of the season, he's barely on the field at all. Find out that he's been battling an illness. Not sure what exactly that means. Not sure why that really takes him out of the games for a whole month, but that's what we've been told. So we're like, okay, this is probably going to end in him transferring because he's clearly been passed by Reed Harris. Jaden Skeet was out snapping him by a ton at the X receiver position, which is what Bradley's going to be best at playing. So there really isn't a role for him unless he wants to accept being a backup, which again, I think he does have skills. And he does have talent. He obviously has unique size. I just think the way the BC progressed, they just weren't in a good position to maximize those skills. And again, we've talked about this Thomas Castellanos. That some of the blame does fall on the coaching staff, but maybe he's just not the player he was as a redshirt freshman back in 2022. That can happen with some guys. Development is not linear, and again, I don't begrudge anybody for like trying this guy out. Like there was definitely some potential there. It just ultimately didn't work, and that's what happens sometimes in the portal. You take these gambles. Like you look at a team like FSU, they gambled on the portal heavily this year. It bit them hard in the butt. You look at a team like Indiana, it's slightly different circumstances, but they went hard in the portal and it benefited them. We see that sometimes it works for some teams, sometimes it doesn't. A team like Louisville does this all the time, and their results are somewhat mixed, but generally mostly good. Yep, it's unfortunate. I really wish that's would have worked out because I thought he was a good player, but it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back to seeing him in the spring and watching him move, and then seeing the difference between that and what we saw later in the summer, and it was stark because during the spring, Bradley was big. He was, he had good moves. He had good hands, but clearly something was going on because by the end of the summer, he was with the second team. He wasn't really practicing. There was lingering issues. He missed a bunch of practice. That all clearly made a big impact. And so this ends, one chapter of Jeff Halfway's transfer portal as both Bradley and Jaden McGowan are now both in the transfer portal. And you have to look at them both and say, neither of these guys were fits for what Bill O'Brien was doing, or Bill O'Brien just didn't see a role for either of these guys because you had Jaden McGowan with 2 receptions for 0 yards.
Mm-hmm.
You had Jerand Bradley, he had that great catch against Western Kentucky with Grayson James, but that was his highlight. Like he had 2 touchdown catches, and he really didn't play that much of a role on this offense.
Yeah, and I think part of it was that they liked Jaden Skeet more in that role. And maybe he just had better chemistry based on his time with Castellanos over the last year and a half. And again, I thought Jaden Skeet played well. Like I didn't think he was playing bad enough to the point where they had to replace him at the Z receiver. They were clearly trying something out with Reed Harris. That was a bit of an issue early on the season, but we saw towards the end it started to work its way out. And then regarding McGowan, it's kind of a thing with him because he is going to be that slot receiver, and that role really is locked down by Lewis Bond, for better or for worse. I think for the better, some people think for the worse. But that slot receiver in Bill O'Brien's offense is somebody that needs to be a very nuanced route runner and understand the more technical aspects of the game. Whereas Jaden McGowan, I think, is basically just kind of a straight line speed merchant. Again, as you can see in the inflated version of him that's in the EA college football game, where you get in the ball anywhere and he's liable to take it a long way, but that's just not how it is in real life. I think that a maybe less siloed, more creative offensive coordinator and coaching staff would find ways to get him more involved. We saw that role kind of go to John Montague down the stretch, where they would get him some of these design touches on screens, jet sweeps, what have you. And I thought that was going to be something they could do with McGowan. Ultimately, they didn't feel the same way. And, we'll see where he ends up. Obviously, BC, it was a big deal when they flipped him from South Carolina in the last portal season. So maybe he ends up back there.
We'll have to wait and see. And I have to tell you, on Eagle Insider, I have the latest list of players I think could be connected to Boston College in the transfer portal, and wide receiver after losing 3 guys. We're not really talking about Montreal Wade because there really isn't much to talk about.
Played 20 snaps against Duquesne this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the wide receiver position actually might be a position that they're going to look at because they are down 3 now and they might need a little bit more depth there. So they might go for another guy. We have a list of some names that they have been potentially looking at up on Eagle Insider. Check that out. In a moment, Mitch has not had his chance to talk about Nebraska. I want to hear his thoughts about this defense that's changing, their quarterback, and what BC's chances are in the Pinstripe Bowl. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and much more on the same page where you place your bets. What I love about this, right now, there's a game going on. I totally forgot about putting a wager down. You can get live action on the results right as it's going on. You can get the over-unders. You can get the passing yards for the quarterbacks. All that up on FanDuel. And the best part about FanDuel, super easy to use if you're a beginner or you're a experienced person using that site. It's super easy to get going. So all you got to do is get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet on FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This is Locked On Boston College, AJ Black. And if you are looking for a second listen, something after you're done with Locked On BC, let me recommend to you Locked On ACC with Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs. They certainly have a unique perspective on all things ACC, and they may have some thoughts about BC that you may or may not agree with. Check out Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so Mitch, while you were in Europe, Boston College is set to play Nebraska. First ever matchup between these two teams. 6-6 Nebraska, 7-5 Boston College. I said 7-5 Nebraska yesterday. I was wrong on that, and then people brought that up, thankfully. What are your thoughts about the Cornhuskers?
So I've been able to catch a few of their games live on the broadcast copy, so I don't have necessarily nuanced takes about either their systems on either side of the ball. But this team, as it's really been for the last few years, it's like just hard to get a read on them. Even going back to the Scott Frost days, it's just like I'm not really sure what they're trying to do, what they want their identity to be. This year they start off pretty hot. They're 5-1. They got a close loss to Illinois, who's a pretty good team, and then they lose 4 straight, get blown out by Indiana, then barely lose to Ohio State, lose to a pretty bad UCLA team that kind of figured out the end of the season, but still that was pretty bad. Lose in a close game against USC, beat Wisconsin, who's not that good, and then blow a 10-point lead to Iowa in a very boring game. And watching this team again, like they've got a good amount of like good players, and they've done a lot of portaling, bringing in some different coaches and everything, and now that's kind of coming back to bite them because you're seeing some players exit, so far in the portal officially. Their 2 backup edge rushers, James Williams and Princewill Umanmielen, I think I got that one right. They're both in the portal, and those are both very talented young guys that they have been very excited about and developed. Looking at this team's pressure stats, James Williams is like their, I guess, like 4th or 5th edge rusher in terms of snaps, but he is like 2nd on the team in pressures. He's a very talented player. I think 2-4 System has him predicted to transfer to FSU. I'm sure that'll work out great for all parties involved. And Princewill Umanmielen is the younger brother of Prince Lee Umanmielen, who was at he was at Florida. Now he's at Ole Miss. Very talented rusher, should be a high draft pick coming up this year. So they're gone, or they're in the portal. Their running back Emmett Johnson, who I think is he's their 2nd leading rusher in terms of carries and attempts. Only has 1 touchdown. They prefer using Dante Dowdle as kind of a goal line back. He's in the portal. So he's in the portal.
But he came back. He was. Sorry.
I see that now. Yep. Withdrawn. Okay.
Yep.
And then Malachi Coleman, wide receiver. Sincere Fiula, I think. They entered the portal early, so maybe those I would imagine they're not playing as much. But and now there's rumors that quarterback Dylan Raiola, who was this big 5-star plus mega freshman, whatever you want to call him, he might be entering the portal. Ostensibly, Miami's calling; they need somebody to replace Cam Ward. This Dylan Raiola guy is extremely talented. It could happen. Raiola had a bit of an up and down season. Again, he's a true freshman, so there's going to be bumps in the road. But he threw 12 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, but he fumbled 7 times. So kind of similar to the Thomas Castellano story a little bit, but with honestly even more turnovers. So if that happens, Nebraska could be down to Heinrich Harburg, who's a local kid, played a lot the year previous. It's kind of a Tim Tebow-esque player. They have some design goal line packages for him as a runner. And on defense, their defensive coordinator, I want to say Tony White.
Yep.
Yeah, because I get him and Tony Gibson confused, and he was the defense coordinator at NC State. He's now going to be the head coach at Marshall. But Tony White is now going to be the defense coordinator at Florida State, so they're losing him. They could have a decent amount of guys opt out for the bowl game. Their cornerback Tommy Hill is a really good player, going to be an NFL prospect. He's been injured a lot this year, so he might not want to test it in a bowl game. I thought I saw some more guys in the portal, namely linebacker Mekhi Gabayor and edge rusher or linebacker Stephon Thompson, who was previously at Syracuse. So it's going to be hard to nail down this team because you're going to have guys in the portal, you're going to have guys opt out that you probably won't figure out until the day before. But I think BC, based on the momentum of their season, is better equipped to win this game. Even though, like you said, they will likely be out missing Donovan Ezeiruaku. They will likely be missing Ozzie Trapilo. They will probably be missing Cam Horsley. And frankly, pretty much a lot of the other seniors who are going to be trying to get to the draft. I would not want to risk injury in this game because a lot of those guys, they can't really afford to have an injury in this game affect them going to the draft because a lot of those guys are going to be fringe day 3 players. Who, if they're injured, then that's going to really knock them down boards. Like, well, there are plenty of other guys that are similarly talented to them. Why would we use a pick on a guy who we're going to have to wait for him to get back from injury? We can take a guy who's basically as talented, or we grade him out similar, but he's healthy, so we can actually use him now. So, I liked what you said yesterday about having your cake and eating it too with bowl games, where, it's a really results-based thing with bowl games, is that you can make it whatever you want to be. And that if you win the game, it's like, oh, this is so emblematic of this team's talent and our coaching staff and how they get this team prepared. And if you lose, it's like, well, all these players opted out, so this game doesn't really matter. So, so I'm very prepared to make this narrative however I want based on the results of the game.
Mm-hmm. Like the 8 wins is going to be awesome if they can get there. But if you don't win because you can't stop the run or you can't get any pass rush, it's because Donovan Ezeiruaku isn't playing and you don't have anybody else in your roster.
Yeah. We're missing the 2 best players on defense who are both on the defensive line. We're missing our best offensive lineman. Of course this was going to be a struggle in this game.
But I look at what Nebraska's losing and it's hard. They're going to be let down a lot.
Yeah.
And as I said on yesterday's episode too, BC, the one thing that I always worry about for BC is a team like SMU, a team that can make it into a track meet that are just so fast and so can move the ball. Nebraska is like the complete opposite of that. They're not going to be able to do that. And
I will say this, they do have wide receiver Jamal Banks, who was a Wake Forest transfer who gave BC absolute hell in 2022. He had 2 touchdowns, I think 6 catches for 87 yards or something. Was just mossing BC's smaller defensive backs that year. I'm pretty sure he's a pretty older player, so he is probably trying to go to the draft as well, and he could be in that same boat where he opts out. But if he does play, that's definitely somebody they're going to need to keep an eye on because he's a good player that could give them a lot of issues again.
And then, of course, this is the Pinstripe Bowl, so you can always
something terrible is going to happen
because it always happens. And someone I retweeted it this morning and I totally had forgotten about this. I remember AJ Dillon skating around. He couldn't get any traction in that game, but they put pictures up, and I forgot about the sneakers that they had to wear.
Yep. The sneakers that they changed into in the second half because they hadn't figured that out that they would need them.
Yes,
even though that's one of the most famous stories in NFL history. I'm pretty sure it's Bears versus the Redskins in the 30s, where again the field was so icy, and then during at halftime, the one team switched from cleats to sneakers, and they blew them out. It's like that's like that's like the 73-0 again. Bears Redskins. There's like one of 3 teams that played back then.
Right.
Might have been Bears Giants. Again, there were like 4 teams back then, so it was all the same teams playing each other. But yeah, it's like, how do you guys not know that? And then Iowa was able to. And again, I was there for that game. Again, the coldest I've ever been in my life, point blank period. And then the 20. I mean, based on BC's, at the 2014 we went to the game knowing that BC had kicking issues and it was going to be a problem. So now we go into this game going with punting issues. Do we see a backwards punt? I think we should. I think we can believe that whoever is BC punt will find a way to punt the ball directly backwards. And at this, again, I said this before. I'm kind of interested in seeing that because that'll at least be be darkly funny.
Liam Connor, our lonely eyes turn to you. All right, in our final segment, Mitch and I are going to talk about Donovan Ezeiruaku, who might have most likely played his final game for BC. Should he be in line for some national awards? We'll get into that in just a moment. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now, you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at Omaha Steaks. It's OMAHAA steaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase applies. Locked On Boston College, wrapping things up here with Mitchell Wolf. When you're done with today's episode, check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. You can find that on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. If you want to talk about college football and the playoffs and Alabama, poor Alabama, getting themselves left off the playoff list. And man, those SEC fans, life is hard. And you know what they're saying right now? AJ, you cover Boston College. What are you thinking? Why do we listen to you? Well, guess what, folks? I'm taking off my maroon and gold here. You didn't make the playoffs. I can say that.
We're in the same.
I can say that objectively.
We're in the same boat. You and Boston College. We are exactly the same, as people have always said. The same program.
Yep. Well, anyways, we're gonna wrap things.
That's not true because BC's 1-0 against Alabama. Am I correct?
2-0.
2-0.
They're 2-0.
Poverty program.
Doug Flutie, man. So later this week, I will be on with Locked On Nebraska, I think. I think they missed an opportunity with Locked On Cornhuskers there. But Locked On Nebraska, I'll be going on with to talk about BC and Nebraska.
Yep, it's Locked On Nebraska. That is a shame.
Yeah.
Locked On Huskers go so hard.
Yeah. And I can't wait for Locked On FSU to have me on to talk about Thomas Castellanos because I'm sure that's coming up too. Mitch, have you seen? I'm going off on a tangent here. Have you seen who FSU, if he goes to FSU, who they're going to play in the season opener?
Is it Bama?
Yep.
Oh boy.
5'9" Thomas Castellanos, who can't really find much what he can do over a big offensive line. Try that over a big defensive line, too. See how that one goes. So, anyways, you can check that out on Locked On Knowles, and I'm sure they're going to be coping and trying to figure out how Thomas Castellanos is going to be their savior for Mike Norvell next year. Anywho, Donovan Ezeiruaku, who we're talking about right now, who is ACC Defensive Player of the Year. Mitch has had a field day doing some of his film stuff for Eagle Insider. And I got to say, some of my favorite film is watching Donovan Ezeiruaku. When you get a good defensive player, watching them on tape is something that I think is completely underrated. I'm sure watching Luke Kuechly on tape is a joy, but you have the same kind of joy watching Donovan Ezeiruaku because this guy was an absolute monster this year. Mitch, can you talk about why he should be considered for some of these national awards?
I mean, put simply, he leads the nation in many important categories that are considered when looking at these kind of awards. And when I was looking at it, had him for ACC Defensive Player of the Year, and I published an article on the site that was basically making the case for that. And as I was writing it, basically, as I was about ready to publish, they announced he's going to be first team All ACC, which I was like, okay, good. That makes total sense. And a few hours after I published it, it came out that he did win ACC Defensive Player of the Year. So I'm hoping that this can manifest him winning some of the other awards. So just to get them out there. So one of them is the Ted Hendricks Award, which is the best defensive end in college football. The Lombardi Award, which is for best lineman, which can be offensive or defensive. It's a very open designation, and that's voted on by coaches. There's the Lott Impact Trophy Award, which is best defensive player and takes into account character and impact off the field and all those things. There's the Chuck Bednarik Award, which is the best defensive player decided by the Maxwell Club and coaches, which I believe has already been decided who the finalists are. I believe it's Travis Hunter, Caleb Downs, and Abdul Carter from Penn State. So, and I will say those are all very deserving candidates. They're excellent players. And then the other one is the Bronco Nagurski Award, which is best defensive player voted on by the Football Writers of America Association. So I don't think he's in running for the Bednarik, but I think he could be for the Nagurski. They haven't announced finalists for a lot of those other awards. But put simply, in 12 games, Donovan Ezeiruaku led the nation in sacks and tackles for loss. He was second in tackles for loss behind Marshall defensive end Mike Green, who overtook him for the lead in sacks because he was in the Sun Belt Championship. So he got an extra game on Ezeiruaku, had a better opportunity to get those numbers. But I will say, for Mike Green is a very good player, and I think he's going to be a very high draft pick as well. Mike Green is also playing at Marshall, and Marshall's a solid team. Again, they just won the Sun Belt, good team. The quality of offensive line that you face in the Sun Belt is not what you're facing. Even the ACC, and obviously a lot of people rag on the ACC, namely Lane Kiffin, thinks their offensive lines are garbage. And I will say Donovan Ezeiruaku got lucky enough to play some bad offensive lines where he was able to rack up stats, which is what you should do when you play a bad team with a middling team with a bad offensive line. And he did exactly that. We saw him dominate against teams like Western Kentucky, UNC, Pitt. He showed up in games against Syracuse. Huge performance in that game. Played a major role in them winning that game. Played huge against FSU. Again, was terrible, but still had a okay offensive line at that point in the season, at least. So, and again, with Donovan Ezeiruaku, it's not just about being a pass rusher, and that's what so many of these defensive ends in college football are these days. Take for example Antoine Powell-Ryland, defensive end for Virginia Tech, who a lot of Virginia Tech fans got in the mentions of when it was announced that Ezeiruaku won AC Defensive Player. It's like, oh, where's Antoine Powell-Ryland? Why isn't he? This is crazy. It's like, okay, well, here's some very simple math. And I know Virginia Tech is the polytechnical school, so they should be able to understand these numbers. Donovan Ezeiruaku has more sacks and more tackles for loss and more pressures than Antoine Powell-Ryland. And yes, he played more snaps, but he was also more impactful as a run defender. He had significantly more stops, which is when it's a tackle that constitutes a failure for the offense. So it's not a tackle that happens 15 yards downfield. It's a tackle that happens at the line of scrimmage within 5 yards, whatever the situation is. And Donovan Ezeiruaku was consistently impactful in all those ways. He also didn't miss tackles. I think he only missed 4 on the year, which is crazy for a guy who led all FBS edge defenders in snaps. And that hurt some of his rate-based stats. But the fact that he was able to play in every game, start every game, play almost every snap, I think of BC's defensive snaps, I think he only missed 50 in the entire year. And I guarantee you, most of those were in the second half of Duquesne where he didn't have to play because the game was over. I think they took him out later in the UNC and UNC game because it was a blowout as well. So he has been dominant in all these ways. And I will say, if you look at the other edge defenders that are probably going to be considered for this award, such as Abdul Carter from Penn State, probably the 2 Ohio State defensive ends, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. I'm just trying to go off my head here. I don't think Nick Scourton had a great of a year at A&M. James Pierce from Tennessee, he's a good player. All those guys, their numbers are just not as good as Donovan Ezeiruaku, point blank period. And I'm sure that these committees are going to give the SEC and Big Ten more bias because they played better teams. Because even though they still have a Mississippi State and a Purdue on their schedule, which are worse than any team besides FSU in the ACC. So I think it's hard to at least not consider Donovan Ezeiruaku for these awards. Like, he should be finalist for all of these, and he should be considered because, again, he is a consistently impactful defender in every possible way you can be for an edge defender. One thing that I looked at, and again, PFF grades have their uses, and I think they're especially useful when you're looking at an entire season full of snaps. If you're looking at one game, it's not that great. It's not as great of a tool. And even in season-long stats, the difference in grades especially in the middle, are somewhat negligible. Like a difference between a 65 grade and like a 70 grade is not that much different. But if you look at Donovan Ezeiruaku's PFF grades, his overall grade was an 89.7. His run defense grade was an 84.3. His pass rushing grade was an 89.8. And his tackling grade was an 83.3. As far as I can tell, he is the only edge defender in college football with at least, let me see. I'm going to put the filter at 100 snaps, which basically, there's guys who, play 10 snaps like, oh my God, he's amazing. Yeah, because they were playing an FCS team and they played well, but it's like again, we're looking at full season sample size. He is the only edge defender in college football that has individual grades for pass rush, run defense, and tackling that are all over 78. So he has been elite in all three main areas, and he's consistently elite. He's been an excellent player. So again, I think that he deserves some of these recognition. We don't see it a lot from BC players. They come along once every few years. But I mean, this season for him is up there, right, with like Harold Landry in 2016, Zach Allen in I think it was 2018, where he had a crazy year. Luke Kuechly in every year, obviously. And even like a guy like Matt Milano, like this is an elite season for a BC defender, and he deserves tons of recognition for it.
There we go. There's Mitch's thoughts. I wanted to get him to think about this, wanted to get his thoughts of this, and we're going to wait and see and watch how Donovan Ezeiruaku probably doesn't get anything because we know how this goes. So, Mitch, where can people find your work?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolf, WOLFE on Twitter. You can find my work at Eagle Insider. We'll obviously, now that we know the bowl game, we'll be looking at some Nebraska preview stuff. I currently have the film getting put in a library for Nebraska's games, so I'm going to get started on watching them and previewing them. And then once we start maybe getting some portal news into BC, then we'll start looking at those players and writing about them and how they can help the Eagles moving forward.
All right. You can follow me on Twitter at AJBlack247. I have up on Eagle Insider right now some offensive names that you might want to look at in the transfer portal that could be connected to Boston College. I'm going to have defense up soon. You can get in for 50% off right now. Get my news. Get Mitch's film analysis. We have Hockey Blogger up there. We've got all of this good stuff all up on Eagle Insider and here on Eagle on Locked On BC. Make sure you're followed and locked on here as well. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back again tomorrow with more news, everything that's breaking, and maybe some info from what Bill O'Brien has been saying ahead of the Pinstripe Bowl. We can talk about that here on Locked On Boston College, your team every day.